Okay, welcome everyone who's here. This is absolutely awesome. The last presentation I did here, we had about 25 people, and we've at least doubled that. And we've got several of them online because this is going over the internet via Zoom as well. And this is really fun for me to do. I have a good time doing this, and I'll give you a little bit of background when we start. This program is going to be entitled in their own words, stories from veterans from World War II. And it all got started several years ago, 2001 to be exact, when a group called the Heritage Education Commission received a donation to collect stories locally from World War II veterans. Back then, we had quite a few World War II veterans. We don't have nearly as many anymore. That started from a donation from Bev Paulson. Some of you people may remember Bev. She was quite active with the Scandinavian Festival. Matter of fact, she chaired it for several years. And that website, heritageed.org, has about 90 oral histories, mostly from local folks here in the Moorhead Fargo area. And since I live in Moorhead, I always say Moorhead Fargo. It all started back in 2009, my involvement with this, when two of my friends, Lori Winterfeld, who was then the Director of Community Education in Moorhead, she was also a Moorhead City Council member, and Lynn Kovash, who was the Assistant Superintendent of Schools at the time. She has since passed away. I'd known her since she was a college student. That's how long I knew her. But anyhow, they called me up one day and say, hey, Les, we got Martin Luther King Day coming up in January, and we'd like you to come over and present to us, right? An old white guy, I said? What's an old white guy going to do talking about Martin Luther King Day? Well, they talked about it for a little while and said that Veterans Oral History Project they're involved with. Why don't you do that? They'll be interested. So I thought about it for a while and said, no, that isn't really what we want to do. And the Library of Congress, shortly before then, had been collecting oral histories of veterans from World War II and earlier and later. So I went online and I found some videos. These are mostly from the Library of Congress collection of stories from World War II veterans. There are some others, and I'll mention those as we go along. But one of the early ones is about Pearl Mac. And what he says in this interview is kind of shocking. I'm going to play it, and you let me know. My videos are starting out with one that makes you want to think. Some of them you will say, oh, I know about that. And then last one has some humor to it. So we'll end on a high note. But I'm going to play what Pearl Mac said.
Rest a bit. We had a chaplain or priest in his habit that worked every day with us when we were setting up camp there in Belgium. I don't remember his name naturally, but he was had not seen Black people before, Afro-American. In my notes, I keep using the word Negro because that's what we were known as. But he was a diligent worker, and he helped us in every way he could. And I later learned that the reason he was helping us, especially when he was building the latrine in the shower head where we could bathe, was because he had been told that the Negroes coming over in the army had been let out of cages and they had tails. And he wanted to satisfy his curiosity. That was one of the reasons.
You heard that, right? This was in the 1940s. And the priest in Belgium heard that Black soldiers were let out of cages and they had tails, and he wanted to see the tails of our Black soldiers. Another group of, well, some of these slides, the early slides and the later slides are going to be of minority veterans because that's what I did for Martin Luther King Day. But some of the others are from something you will enjoy that's a little more local. But one of the things that happened during World War II is Franklin Roosevelt ordered to be organized actually something called the Tuskegee Airmen, where Black soldiers were recruited to go to Tuskegee, Alabama at the institute there and become airmen. Eleanor Roosevelt, Mrs. FDR, went down there for a visit, and she was talking to one of the people in charge of the group. He happened to be a Black man himself. And Mrs. Roosevelt said, "Can Negroes really fly airplanes?" And the guy said, "Of course they can. We can. You want to go for a ride?" Well, the Secret Service people at that point said, no, wait a minute here. We're not sure. We're not sure that we're going to let the president's wife go up in an airplane, no matter who's flying it. So they called FDR, and the response that he gave them was, "Eleanor will do whatever she wants. If she wants to go fly in an airplane, she's going to go fly in an airplane. There's not much you can do about it." So the Tuskegee Airmen did give Eleanor Roosevelt a flight. Here is from a documentary on the Tuskegee Airmen, and I'm going to play that clip.
I went to Tuskegee in January of 1943. And I finished the 4 phases of it, and I graduated, got my wings and my commission October the 1st, 1943. And that was the first thing in my life that I really, really wanted to do. I almost washed out at the beginning, and it scared me to death, but I made it. Well, but that, my determination to make it, I put everything I had into it, because our class started with 72 in it, and we graduated 23. That's how many were washed out. And it was one of the stellar points in my life. It was such a fight for us to be able to fly. We couldn't afford to goof up or mess around.
So how many Air Force veterans besides me and John are in here? Anybody? Oh, cool. Good job. Thank you for your service. Also during World War II, that's a little loud again. During World War II, because the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, the day that will live in infamy as FDR broadcast over the radio. We also saw signs in our country such as this: "We don't want Japs back here ever." So I'm going to share a couple stories about Japanese Americans who were in World War II. The first one is Warren Sunish, and a couple of the reasons I picked him out of the history things: he was born on the 4th of July in the United States, but and he lived on the West Coast. His family was evacuated, not excavated, evacuated to a place in Heart Mountain, Wyoming. And while he and his family were there, he enlisted and served with the Army. Now, if I were a young man, 18 years old, and somebody forcefully moved my parents from Minnesota to the middle of Wyoming, I'm not sure I would have enlisted. I don't know about you guys, but I'm not sure I would have. Here's part of his story.
Dr. Tsuneishi, exactly what happened to your family during the internment process? For instance, how did they find out that they had to leave their home?
There was, of course, an executive order from Franklin Delano Roosevelt in February of 1942. And shortly after that, there were proclamations on curfews and the zones of exclusion for Japanese Americans living on the West Coast. Ultimately, there was an announcement in April of 1942 of the evacuation of all Japanese Americans from the 3 West Coast states, all 120,000 of us.
And he's the guy that enlisted while his parents were in a camp in Wyoming. Grant Hirabayashi. I spent 2 years in Japan, so I'm fairly close on the pronunciation of these names. The video that I had is really kind of scratchy. It's not a good quality, so I'm not going to play it, but I'm just talk about it for a little bit. He was born in Seattle, Washington, so he was a U.S. citizen from the day he was born. As a youngster, he went back to Japan, where his parents came from, and studied over there. And he was actually in Japan when Pearl Harbor happened. He joined the Army. He was part of Merrill's Marauders, and I wasn't sure who those people were, but that was a group in the Army specially trained to go behind enemy lines and cause disruption, mostly in China, Burma, and India. And he was one of 22 Japanese Americans that were in that group, and not many of them survived. He talks about his interview, how he was allergic to K rations. And I don't know what they did about it, but he said he was in there. And what he did was interrogate the Japanese POWs when they were captured. Now, we're going to change slightly. We're going to talk about the 99th Battalion, and I'm guessing that nearly everyone in here, or most of you, know what the 99th Battalion was. It was a group of Norwegian Americans who spoke Norwegian and served in a special unit created by the Army, and were to go into Norway and Europe when the invasion of the European mainland happened. And if you got this month's Viking magazine, there's a nice article about this group, and I'm going to play a short clip.
High up in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, you can find a few reminders of the 99th Battalion Separate, a Viking battalion of 999 members, and the 10th Mountain Division of 14,000 soldiers and officers. They trained here for winter warfare for 9 months before they were shipped to Europe.
I'm Ulaski Jumper from Norway to fight for the USA. They joined up the mountain battalion, and here they think they will stay.
We were told we were going to Scotland and train with Norwegian commandos and then attack Norway.
Very much alive, German army gathered its forces in the Forest Isles to strike one strong, decisive blow at the American army.
Kampene inn mot selve Kjerne-Tyskland, så ble Aachen et viktig punkt. Der ble 99. bataljon satt inn og kjempet svært tappert.
Nazi party is willing to sacrifice every soul in Germany to stave off defeat.
Patton was to our right as we was fighting, and north of us was the British.
It was a rough time. Skal man vinne en krig, så må man vinne en krig med hjertet.
My father died when I was 12. He very much wanted to come to America. My mother, on the other hand, did not want to come over, but she was a good sport. She came with him, and I was 2 years old at the time that we came in 1923. There was another unit there, the 10th Light,
which was the America's first ski division. And we trained with them, alongside of them, with skis and all the same tactics. I was eager to train and to be part of the organization. I realized that it was a very important thing. When we paraded, we had a Norwegian flag, an American flag. America was showing us that they cared about Norway.
You know, it really was back in 1945. I was just a kid. And I remember when the king came back on the 7th of June, and my brother and I, he's a year younger. I was almost 5, he was 4. And the whole family, except my aunt, she was 14. She and my brother and I were not allowed to go to Oslo with the rest of the family because all of Norway is going to be there.
Sjaluppen ligger klar, og kongen går fra bordet, fulgt av kronprinsesse Märtha.
Could be a month or 2 later, we were in Oslo for some kind of a victory parade or something. And then I remember you saw the Yankee soldiers. I knew they were Norwegian American soldiers, but never gave it a thought again until I came out here. And my son and I said, let's go up to Ski Cooper. It's a nice little area. Let's go up there and ski. So we went up there to ski, and it happened to be on the skiing day for the 99th and the 10th mountain. And I had a Norwegian flag on my jacket, which I always have. And here come one of these guys in all white, you know, he had his whites on from the war, and said, are you Norwegian? So I said, yes. Or it was like I was the long lost son, you know, finally he had found me. And he gave me patches and stickers and all kinds of stuff about the 99th. That's when I realized I had probably seen him before. I probably seen him in Oslo in 45. I didn't know what the 99th was, and, you know, I had no idea. It could be 5, 6 years later. We found out there was 1,000 guys here, you know, either Norwegian or Norwegian descent that had trained out there.
I'm delighted to be here today to award the 99th Infantry Battalion veterans with the World War II Participant Medal, the Viking Battalion.
There are just a few soldiers and officers of the 99th Battalion Separate that are still alive today. In May of 2011, the Norwegian government awarded the War Participant Medal to the members of the 99th Battalion that are still among us. The ceremony was held at the Norwegian Embassy in Washington, D.C., 70 years after the battalion was established in Minnesota.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most honorable thing that has ever happened to me. I'm gracious. Thank you.
I also went out looking for other stories about 99th Battalion. I like this one, the one I just played, because it has nice history of it and everything else. But a high school group had interviewed this person, and all he was identified as Julian F. And he was from Minnesota. And I got to play it just because of how he talks.
Inducted into the service on May 2nd, 1942. I was sent down to Camp WWII, Texas, where it never rains and it was hot and dry. And I took my basic training there. And where we heard about some Norwegian 99th was going to activate up in Minnesota. And I was from Minnesota, so it didn't take me long to sign up for that. And we were down in maneuvers in Louisiana, and here the orders come. There was quite a few of us down there at that time, about 60. They boarded us on a train and sent us up to Camp Ripley at Little Falls, Minnesota.
Now, when I was growing up, I grew up in a mostly Scandinavian Norwegian community, and the way that gentleman talked was what I heard when I was growing up. And actually, I had quite a Norwegian accent growing up, and my speech teacher in high school helped me fix that. So I'm forever thankful that I am doing that. But I could just hear in the way he was saying, you know, I'm from Minnesota too. That yes, I can still do the accent somewhat. During World War II, in the Far East or in the Pacific Command, the Native Americans were used as code talkers, and they would use the Navajo language and use codes to talk. And Keith Little is one of the people. I also, in my research, found that some of the Cherokee and the Choctaw Indians did the same thing during World War I. So I'm going to play this little clip for you.
And the Navajo, if a Navajo code talker is really fluent with his code system, he's given a message to send, he looks at it, calls the receiver on the other side, here's a message, and the receiver will say, go ahead and send it, or something like that. They have a system of authorizing things, you know, the way they do. So he starts talking, and he looks at the words, and he encodes them as he's talking. The guy over there is decoding it as he's saying it.
And to the best of my knowledge and the research I was doing, the Japanese never did break. You got it down a little too far, I think. Never did break the Navajo language code that they were using. And I always put up the Iwo Jima flag raising on Mount Suribachi, you know, on Iwo Jima back in the Pacific. And there were actually two. The second or third time I gave this presentation, there was a woman in the audience who said, no, you got that wrong, because my uncle was one of the people in the first flag raising, which is the one on the left. And she's absolutely correct. The one on the right is the more well-known photo, and there's a nice statue of it in Washington, D.C. that I've visited a number of times. And I debated whether to include some things about one of the people who was a Native American called Ira Hayes. He was one of the flag raisers at Iwo Jima, and he was made somewhat more famous by Johnny Cash song. But in Johnny Cash's autobiography, you can read what's up there. He was performing in Vietnam, and one of the soldiers, Native American soldiers, came up and told him about that. Now, when I was doing this presentation, first or second time, somebody asked, well, Ira Hayes was there. Who are the other people who raised the flag on Mount Suribachi and Iwo Jima? And there they are. And if you look at it, you know, an immigrant from Czechoslovakia, somebody from the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, a good old hillbilly boy from Eastern Kentucky, French-Canadian mill worker in New Hampshire, and somebody from Wisconsin. Just regular soldiers were the group that raised the flag there. And they should be recognized as well. During World War II, as all of you know, the Germans in the Holocaust against the Jewish people. And I found this interview in the Library of Congress again about Leonard Metzger, who enlisted in the Army. And if I remember right, yeah, he landed at Normandy with the invasion in 1944. And here's his story.
Germans outside the barn. There must have been 70, 80 Germans. There were 7 of us. We were all in bad shape. And he came in, and luckily I could speak some German, not very well, but being Jewish, I knew I was in trouble. So I took my dog tags, which had an H on it, and buried them in the sand right there in the barn. They took us prisoner, they put us in a truck, and our own planes came over and started to strafe the truck. We jumped, we couldn't get out, but they jumped in the ditch. Luckily, none of us got hurt. And they took us to a German hospital, not too far from where we were. And when we got to the German hospital, we just laid there on the ground, on the floor. They gave us no treatment. And a nurse came in, saw us laying there, and we all had a beard. We hadn't shaved in a long time. And the nurse said to me in German, "Schönes Amerikaner," which means you're a good looking American. And she gave me an apple to eat. And she said, "Shh, don't tell anybody," she said in German. So thank God. So I shared it with another person with me. Then the German colonel came in. We were laying there, and he said, "We must have some information." So I said, "All I can give you is my name, rank, and serial number." Well, he kept insisting I give the information, and I said, "Your name, rank, and serial number is all we can give you." And he said to the lieutenant, "Aufschneiden," which meant cut their feet off. Well, I was sweating bullets. So how it came to me, I don't know. I was young, and I said to him in German, I said, I could speak a little German. I took it in school and everything. I said, "Ich bin ein Deutsch," which means I am a German. He said, "Warum?" which means why? And I told him my mother and father came from Hamburg, Germany. So he kept looking at me and looking at me and looking at me. And finally, he said in German, "Er hat blaue Augen," which means he has blue eyes. He is a German. Nicht aufschneiden. Don't cut his feet off. Well, that was scary. I bet. I was sweating, I'll tell you. Well, anyway, they took 3 of the guys away that were with me, and I think they cut their feet off. I'm not sure, but I can't say yet what they did. Yeah.
People do really nasty things to other people during war. I had the opportunity to listen to a presentation by Ray Stordahl. He was former Moorhead mayor, and he was one of the founders of Silver Line Boats over in Moorhead. And he did a presentation to a group, and I got to record him. And actually, we became kind of friends afterwards. He and his wife and another couple would frequently be at the speakeasy Sunday mornings for breakfast, and I'd go over and visit with Ray. Nice fellow. Here's the ending of his presentation.
Also, we were the ones that opened the gates of Mauthausen concentration camp, and there's also a statue down there to give us credit for that. And in fact, and I was showing this to Mark one day, I received a book that's called Spaniards in the Holocaust. There were Spaniard prisoners in Mauthausen that had been captured during the Spanish War of 1938. And they were still in prison or still in a concentration camp in mid-1945. And in the back, there's a list of the 64 people that opened the gate, and my name is in there. So I'm in the history book.
So Ray Stordahl is in the history book, is what he said. I searched for Latino Spanish American soldiers during World War II, and the best one I could find, there were not many recorded interviews of those folks, was this a young man, Antonio Martinez or Martinez, however you feel like pronouncing it. And he was aboard a ship that was torpedoed by the Japanese. And just listening to him talk about his experience was something that we noticed a lot when we did our recordings of World War II veterans. They talk rather matter-of-factly, you know, yeah, the torpedo hit our ship and we went topside, but you can hear it. And this was rather common.
And how long were you at sea before the torpedo hit you?
So I'd say about 5 hours, maybe longer, I don't recall.
So it wasn't very long.
No, 5, 6 hours, you know, maybe 8, I don't remember.
How long was the trip supposed to take?
I don't know how long it was supposed to take. I know it was zigzag, you know.
Zigzagging across the English Channel.
Right. And it was pretty rough. It was rough.
Okay. So walk us through what happened then. Did you were playing cards and did you feel some kind of jolt or something?
Yes, yes. It knocked me off from the back. It knocked me forward. When it hit it, I bounced me forward. I was laying on the side of the round part of the boat. It just knocked me forward.
Later in the interview, he talks about how they got topside and several of them were killed, drowned in the English Channel. Part of the presentation I made for Martin Luther King Day included information on the integration of our military in 1948 by executive order. And there's lots of opinions about executive orders over the past few years, but this one I believe was really worthwhile and should have been done. President Harry Truman started the integration process of our military in July of 1948. And it continued until 1954. That was 6 years, took 6 years to integrate our military. And the last Black battalion was decommissioned back in 1958. It wasn't all that long ago, and I always relate this little story of my own personal experience back in 1965 when I was stationed at the University of Indiana. The Air Force sent me to a year's worth of college. I thought, hey, this Air Force is not bad. Anyhow, one of my classmates was from Alabama, and his girlfriend was living back there going to college in Alabama. And he had heard through the grapevine that his girlfriend had attended a party on campus or at college, and a Black man was present. And he broke up the relationship because of that. 1965, crazy. This is the feel-good interview. We're getting almost done. I just have 1 or 2 slides left. Roy Bailey, and you're going to have to turn the volume up on this one, sweetie, because I know it's quiet. From Alaska, and just listen to it.
The hospital did was to give you a cigarette if you smoke, to let you know when you smell right, you're in hospital, you can't smoke. The doctors and nurses, and of course the orderlies, were busy, and the place never stopped. But somehow or other, the word got out that there was an Eskimo in the bunch, and everyone was stopping to see who the Eskimo was or where he was. So I got up on my elbow to see that where this Eskimo was. I asked him where the Eskimo was, and the orderly said, "That's you, you dummy."
I told you I was going to end on a feel-good story. That's a feel-good story. You are, you dummy. All right. that's the end of my formal presentation. It took about 35 minutes, which is what I planned because I don't want to keep you here a whole long time. I do have some other presentations that I'm willing to do if anybody has an interest. And we had 84 people here today, which is absolutely amazing. And if any of those are of interest to any of you, see me afterwards, tell Allison or tell Lynn Ramos-Mo, you still here? Yeah, you can tell her if you want to see one of these presentations in